Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on Consumerism is Breaking Us. I'm Dr. Gordon E. Karkner, a meta-educator with UBC postgraduate students. I'm an author, a blogger, and a YouTube webinar producer. Here's a quick look at the title of my new book, Towards an Incarnational Spiritual Culture. By way of introduction of this seminar, this webinar, I'd like to make a couple points. Contemporary attitudes towards material possessions constitute a critical problem for Western societies. People are captivated by a passion to acquire and possess, thinking that this will make them happy and guarantee their flourishing. The quest for affluence has exceeded what any previous generation could have imagined. This outlook is hardwired into our societal infrastructure. The ideology is fed to us daily. And Joyce Appleby calls it the ceaseless revolution. It is a sad commentary on Western societies that they are founded on greed, self-interest, and overconsumption. We have all in some way been colonized by capitalism and consumption. And as we know, many important loyalties are sacrificed in the name of upward mobility. So the question is, have we reduced everything to its market value, even our relationships? Here's a bit of an overview of this session. Philosophical roots: how did vice become a virtue? Human consequences of the acquisitive ideology. Environmental violence, the dark side of greed. Moral, spiritual identity corruption. And finally, some sort of response of lifestyle reset and the way forward. So welcome, and I'm glad you're able to join us. Hopefully this is informative and helpful and gives you some things to think about. What are the philosophical roots of consumerism or rising expectations? Adam Smith in the UK felt that the individual pursuit of self-interest would not only benefit the individual economically, but also work for the common good of society. This is his famous trickle-down theory. The blessings of the few will flow down to the many, also called the invisible hand. Benjamin Franklin in America had similar ideas. His ideal of the new humanity was a society in utilitarian pursuit of success and prosperity. He encouraged efficient, conforming, acquisitive behavior. Affluence, in this case, had become a virtue. And the centerpiece of this new morality is the desires of the individual. My individual needs emerge as a sacred term, a justification for all sorts of behavior, noble and ignoble. Greed, in this case, becomes a need. Economists are obsessed with the consumer, as you know, and they're often fabricating dissatisfaction and multiplication of new needs continually to keep us consuming. John Maynard Keynes kept it in this way: avarice and greed must remain our gods for a little while longer. And I would like to stop at a Notre Dame historian, Brad Gregory, who was one of our visiting scholars at UBC, where he talks about the goods life rather than the good life. This is a kind of moral inversion. I quote from him: "The goods life has been manufactured in a double sense. It has been concocted ideologically, and stuff has been fabricated in ever-expanding ways in tandem with the extraordinary malleability and manipulability of human desires. Practices once regarded as dangerous and immoral became, because they were detrimental to human flourishing and to the common good, have in a dramatic reversal been redubbed the very means to human happiness and to the best of society." There are human consequences to consumerism in the area of commodification and depersonalization. Norman Wiersbe puts it this way: a new kind of person develops, a person who relates to others more impersonally, and without a felt need to honor the social and ecological memberships that he or she is a part of and necessarily lives through. We are more isolated, insecure, divided, anxious, nihilistic, insatiable, unsettled, obsessed, and addicted. Materialism and greed are truly the opiate of the people in this case. Enough is never enough. Consumerism, in a sense, is a bankrupt search for fulfillment. We are living in denial of our normal human limitations, and Ernest Becker calls this death denial. So we have a crisis here needing our immediate attention. So consumerism has us, in one sense, living on the edge. A consumer defines self by the quantity and quality of goods owned. Consumer is dominated by the goal of making money. Consumer is a thin self, as Charles Taylor puts it, lacking higher metabiological meaning. And finally, a consumer is an isolated individual. Commodification. How does consumerism put our very humanity in jeopardy? The treatment of things as commodities easily slips over into seeing persons as commodities, and this is what we call commodity think. The marketing and consumption worldview sees people as objects to be targeted and manipulated versus appreciated and nurtured. They become a mere consumer profile targeted by algorithms and marketing. Employees can often be reduced to a means of production, cogs in a corporate machine. Our commodities tend to remake us in their image, making us slaves to our own creations. We become more quantitative, mechanical, and manageable. This leads to a disenchantment in human beings. And J.P. Kavanaugh captures it. Greater accumulation is the omnipresent a priori given. Once self-worth is defined in terms of appropriation, the cultural myth will relentlessly be one of materialism, prosperity, consumption, buying power, competition, and greater economic exploitation. More on commodity thing. Possessions become ultimate while people are reduced to the useful, exploitable thing. Another quote from J.P. Kavanaugh. Our very humanity is called into question by the ideology of consumerism. It is the gospel with its valued givens, which prevents us from seeing, much less responding to, the neighbor, even the beseeching person next to us. We no longer see persons, we see things. Let that sink in. Tragically, many aspects of our intimacy and sexuality have also been reduced to a commodity. Sex trafficking, pornography, and dangerous liaisons. Others' lives are sacrificed to one's personal pleasure or wealth production. Commodity think destroys community and laughs at the common good, leading to fragmentation and mutual resentment. Then, of course, there's the whole violence towards the environment. Dr. Olaf Slaymaker, Professor Emeritus, UBC Geography, puts it this way. Our success as a society will really be measured in the kind of world we pass on to our children. And so we pause to look at the costs of consumerism, costs of consumption. Things like climate change, ozone depletion, global warming, air, water, and ground pollution, islands of plastics in our oceans, ocean acidification, death of coral reefs, tremendous loss of species, deforestation and desertification, wildfires, heat domes, and melting glaciers. So the myopic short-term goals of continued economic growth ad infinitum have produced a massive long-term threat to our health and the health of our planetary home. We are deluded if we think that the planet can sustain 7.2 billion people consuming at this North American rate. The problem is like a huge accumulated international debt. Developing nations are quite vulnerable to big power, precedents, and pressures, and injustices abound, as you know from the news. Here's an example of one of those great islands in the North Pacific, an island of plastic garbage. It's shocking, shocking image. Then there's the moral and spiritual deterioration or deprivation. Virtues that support community and accountability are subverted by consumerism, leaving caritas, humilitas behind. Historically and biblically, acquisitive attitudes have been seen as quite dangerous. It is antithetical to the teaching of Jesus and the Apostle Paul. Yet many Christians today have bought into such avarice as well. Paul Gould puts it this way: our disengagement from an objectivization of nature is a fundamental shift, which moves us from seeing things and people as gifts to viewing them as commodities for use and consumption. In this new immanent frame, meaning resides in our individual appetite, and the good life is identified with our consumption. The satisfactions of pleasure or hedonism rule the day. So the possessive consumptive attitude is corrosive of the individual values of service, community, and compassion towards others. As we know, greed is highly corrosive, promoting a serious decline in trust between people. Wealth is quite dangerous if not handled in an accountable fashion, and the power that goes with such wealth can be tremendously intoxicating and destructive. One can easily sell one's soul for mammon or money or higher net worth. Here's a quote from G.K. Chesterton, a famous British author, who says, "A person who is dependent upon the luxuries of this life is a corrupt person, spiritually corrupt, politically corrupt, financially corrupt. Christ said that to be rich is to be in peculiar danger of moral wreck." So what's to be done? Are there alternatives? Is there a way out of our consumption? Canadian folk singer Bruce Cockburn articulated the longings of many hearts today for change in this cultural colonization in his song, More Not More. Here are some of the words: more songs, more warmth, more love, more life, not more fear, not more fame, not more money, nor more games, more current, more spark, more touch deep in the heart, not more thoughtless cruelty, not more being this lonely, more growth, more truth, more chains, more loose, not more pain, not more walls, not more human, living human voodoo dolls. So in response to consumerism, we want to talk about three things: contentment, gratitude, and compassion for the poor. These are part of the way out. First of all, simplicity. We need a change of heart, a change of direction, a new plausibility structure. One might say a new map for success, where there's more life and meaning with less goods and less pollution. And couldn't find a better quote than the one from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, where he gave this talk to a graduating class at Harvard University in 1978. If humanism were right in declaring that man is born to be happy, he would not be born to die. Since his body is doomed to die, his task on earth must be of a more spiritual nature. It cannot be unrestrained enjoyment of everyday life. It cannot be the search for the best ways to obtain material goods and then cheerfully to get the most out of them. It has to be the fulfillment of a permanent, earnest duty so that one's life journey may become an experience of moral growth, so that one may leave life a better human being than one started it. A lot to think about there. So we must demote our lust for riches in order to discover the true richness of life itself. And one good example of such a transformation to contentment, that is more with less, is Francis of Assisi. Here's the painting of him from the 12th century. in many ways, he's the patron saint of the environmental movement. Then there's the issue of compassion. At the end of the day, what is supremely important? How do we grow up and wise up and get free of our obsessions, lose our iron grip on our possessions? Radical generosity seems to be a key virtue to cultivate in order to resist the trend of self-centeredness. We live in one human community, one global village, and we need to share. Mahatma Gandhi put it this way: the world has enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. Along the lines of Solzhenitsyn, David Brooks, in his book, The Second Mountain, really believes that we should see ourselves as on a moral journey of becoming better persons. So are we willing to reevaluate our lifestyle by the needs of the poor and disadvantaged, and by the needs of creation and future generations? Is it not high time to reflect on our situation and change our habits? The answer to this question is complex, but perhaps quite fruitful. When we sit back and reflect on life and our consumption, we might come to this conclusion: the ladder you are climbing may actually be leaning against the wrong wall. So there may be a need for a values reset. The move we are recommending is away from will to power and will to possess, and towards will to generosity and will to stewardship. We must take responsibility for the other. Because we're exhausting ourselves for success, prestige, and world domination, while we deprive others of their basic survival necessities. Very appropriate to this discussion, Jesus' comment to a wealthy young prince, a CEO of his day, is noteworthy. He says, "Sell everything you possess and feed the poor." He was pointing to the deeper life of agape love, rooted in the radical alterity of God's goodness. From God's perspective, he was out of touch with reality. Unfortunately, this nice young man was addicted to his wealth and missed the most strategic opportunity of his life to become more human and adopt the good life inaugurated by Jesus Christ. This respected young prince embodied the opposite set of values to Francis of Assisi. He was not free spiritually, but a slave to an ideology which put him in the top 1% economically as an extremely acquisitive individual. So can we do it? Can we do it together? Reduce, recycle, and reuse. Here's our conclusion from this discussion so far. We've examined our current addiction to the goods life and found it questionable and weak, even pernicious. Jesus showed the way forward in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 25, and Paul reviews this posture in Philippians 2. The way up is first down, the road of humility, unity, and servanthood. If all of life is a gift, why do we hoard our money, possessions, and talents? We are missing out on the joy and meaning of helping others, of building a better world, of healing our planet, of promoting justice and peace. So let's come together and talk about this, step away from the madness and into the truth and wisdom of the gospel, making space for God and the other. At the end of the day, we have to say that God alone can handle the role of the center of meaning in our lives, not consumption. Here's some suggestions on bibliography for you to follow up this discussion, and hope you'll find something there that would be helpful in your reading. So thanks very much for joining me in this webinar, and hope it's been stimulating and provoking, and we'll see you next time.